Good morning or afternoon, guys, depending on which time you're watching this. Today, we're going to talk about some OSHA occupational health and safety issues. Uh, this will either just keep you in compliance with that in case you're asked about it. It will also keep you out of trouble if you're on a job site and OSHA shows up. Some states have state regulations, as if in Tennessee has TOSHA, which is Tennessee Occupational Health and Safety. And then OSHA relies on Tennessee to enforce the safety rules as long as the Tennessee codes meet or exceed OSHA's. So you got some different codes to go by. A lot of people don't like the OSHA thing, but the thing I'd like to challenge you with is make money on it. And we're going to talk about different things here and different ways that you can make money on the OSHA regulations if you know them and if you can document it. Always good to have danger signs and fencing and caution tape and that sort of thing in an area that you do have hazards. If you're running generators outside of a school or a high traffic area, you probably want a barricade or a fence up to keep people away from the generators. Anything that's hot that would cause a burn, like a smokestack on a heater if you're using temporary heat on the job. But just use common sense and define your risk and find out what you need. But if a fence is warranted to keep people away, put up a fence and you'll make money on putting up a fence. So it's not that big a deal. It's not hard to do. It slows the job down a little bit. You can get that done. But again, once you slow a job down, it gives you a little relaxed time to be able to prepare and make the job run smoother in the long run. Always do a risk assessment, whether it's dealing with hazard risk or maybe no risk at all. But look at what you got going and just ask yourself the question, who's in charge of risk assessment? Who's in charge of workplace accidents should you have one? If you've got on a commercial project, if you've got several people working there, at what point do you need a safety person there, and is that what training does that safety person need to have? Then you need to have boards posted on how to get in touch with that safety person. Every board should have an emergency call 911. But if you have a safety issue, you may go to the cafeteria and you've got emergency personnel stationed there, maybe a paramedic, an EMT, a firefighter, something like that that can help with minor issues that really don't necessitate calling 911. But make sure that you do that assessment. And when do you need those people? Say, well, those people are expensive and we can't get paid for that. If you know the OSHA rules and regulations and know the OSHA laws, by all means, you can get paid for that. So you just have to know those laws and put that in your little drop down in your notes under the line item that you're billing for that. But you can have a safety officer there helping out with that. Safety officer may be as simple as making sure we got plenty of water. Those little things sometimes are overlooked. When it's hot or dry inside a building or outside, and you got people in there working, you don't want people getting dehydrated and passing out on you. So the part of their job would be to just make sure they got proper hydration and enough water to drink and enough breaks. Um, OSHA has a guideline. It's very little known of, but when you go through the OSHA course, you'll get it. But if the temperature is above such and such degrees and it don't seem that hot, but let's say 90, and you've got people working in PPE, they have to have a break just every few minutes of the day. And that break costs a lot of money because that's times when they have to come out, they have to take their PPE off where they can get fresh air. They have to put new PPE on when they go back in. And but the law requires that over those temperatures that they have a certain amount of breaks. and it can get as high as up to 45-minute breaks out of an hour, which seems to be anybody with common sense a little excessive. But hey, we didn't make the law; we just have to follow them. So you need to know what the permissible exposure limits, we talked about that a while ago, are when you're working in PPE to deal with heat. Now, that may require you put air conditioning in the building. So instead of working in 90-degree inside a building with heat, you may put air conditioner and lower the temperature to 60 degrees or 65 degrees, something that'll lower that temperature down to make it to where they're not having to take near as many breaks. But if you don't know the rules of the game, you can't win the game. No matter what game you're playing, what job you're doing, you have to know the rules of the game. And as long as you know what those rules are and you have those documented, then you can hire the proper people to see to it that that's happening and make notes, and then you'll get paid for it. So there's a lot of hazards in the industry. There can be low, medium, high, and very high hazards. And again, you need to know what you're dealing with to be able to supervise it correctly. And if you don't have the proper people to deal with a hazard, then you need to get the proper personnel on the scene before you start dealing with it. There's all kind of hazards that you can have in a fire, in a water damage. We think about commercial more because they're dealing more with commercial products, but you can have that in residential as well. So just know what you're dealing with. Do a very good inspection. Uh, Assess your risk and really know what you're dealing with and what hazards you have so you can address those accordingly. There are different protections for different hazards. You see the dust mask that the gentleman is wearing here, and since COVID came around, everybody refers to every mask as an N95. You and I both know that's not correct. Those dust masks do not have any N95 protection for you. They do make N95 masks. They're very seldomly worn properly. So you need to have a different assessment on what you're working in and how you're working in it, and make sure that you get the proper PPE that you've got going. As you can see, the gentleman here in the picture, exposed eyes, exposed face, exposed ears, exposed arms, just exposure everywhere. So it depends on what you're working on as to what level of PPE that you would need. Several different hazards. Again, you've got to know what you're looking for. You've got to know what order they're in. There are very low levels of hazard, such as WD-40, and then there's high levels of hazard, such as raw chemical products or asbestos or something in that range. Uh, Different ways of handling a hazard. You start from the bottom up, protect the workers with PPE. That's not always the best situation, but it is one situation. You can change the way that people are working in the environment. In other words, if you've got silica dust and the permissible limits on silica dust is 30 parts per billion, and you can put air scrubbers in or exhausted uh, air scrubbers exhausting out the wind and cleaning and lower that level, then you change the way the people are working. You can isolate people from the area or the hazard, which would be containment that we use. If you've got asbestos in one area and you're doing demo and people working in the other, then good containment is a way to isolate your people from that. Containment includes, but it's not limited to, changes of air pressure and having positive and negative pressure where it's appropriate. Replace the hazard and remove the hazard. Remove that hazard and replace it with something else that's not hazardous. So several ways of of trying to get rid of a hazard to make it safer. One way of isolating people from the hazard would be an example of asbestos. They may leave asbestos insulation on piping and plumbing, but they encapsulate it with a wrap, and that wrap is airtight, and so the asbestos is still there. But until somebody breaks that barrier and gets behind it, then it is safe to be there. So there's different ways of getting rid of the hazard or making the hazard safe. Again, PPE, different controls, eliminating the hazard. There's different types. I think we've already went over this slide: low, medium, high, and very high hazards. Um, just you have to evaluate and know what you have. And if you're not a professional in this area, then when you hire your indoor air quality person, make sure they identify the areas and how you should handle those areas while they identify them. Accident investigations. Again, the cover up's usually worse than the crime, so make sure you have a good investigation if there's an accident. If it's a very minor accident, you have proper personnel look at it, then you can handle it like that. If it's a ongoing accident to where someone may need medical treatment at a facility or something, you'll want to handle it a little bit differently there. Just make sure you go over what is going on and do a good, thorough investigation. Why did the guy fall? Did he have someone supporting his ladder? Does everyone on the job have somebody supporting their ladder? And make sure you tell the truth about it, because again, the cover up's worse than the crime. So make sure that you know exactly what's going on. Some of the things you'll want during an investigation are the names of the affected employees, time and location, witnesses, who were the witnesses who actually seen the accident, what they were doing, what type of equipment they were using, who's making the report. Do you have sketches or photographs of the accident scene? Uh, what's your corrective action to make sure nobody else is going to get into the same accident that that person just did? And then just a good description of what happened. Why did we why did we have an accident, and what do we do to keep from having another one? Job hazard analysis. We've talked about this 2 or 3 times, but the first thing you should do on the scene of any job you go to is do a hazard assessment, a hazard analysis. What are hazards here that could be a problem? Is there mud on the sidewalks? Is there soap in the carpet that's causing it to be real slippery? Is there ice on the sidewalks or something? Whatever the hazard may be, identify what that is and put together a plan to make sure that you've got that handled the best you can to keep someone from getting hurt. Uh, Several different ways to do that. You can have sentry signals, carbon dioxide detectors, smoke detectors, different types of chemical detectors that you can have on the job site if you're in one that does that. Um, you can have pressure and temperature sensors to know that you're pulling correct negative or positive pressure, and to know what your temperature is, so you know that you're not exposing somebody to too high or too low of temperatures to safely work in. Um, so, and then your protective clothing that you can have, and to protect, particularly in environmental conditions such as bad weather, snow, rain, or something of that nature. Job hazard analysis and job safety analysis are similar processes, but they're just a little different. Job hazard analysis is when you go in and you identify what the hazard is. Job safety analysis is when you put together a plan and go through and say, this is the plan that we're going to do to handle this situation and to make sure that we've got the best plan put together for no one on the site to get hurt. And again, once again, keep up with all the people doing this, their titles, their supervisors, and whatever, and you're going to put that on the bill. Walking surfaces, working surfaces. How many of you has been on a demolition job and couldn't walk down the hallway for piled up sheetrock and 2x4s and stuff where they're doing demolition? It's definitely a hazard. One of my biggest pet peeves that I see most often are nails sticking up in boards. You say, well, that's not a death defying hazard, but you get a rusty nail in the bottom of your foot. You not only lose a worker, you take a supervisor out for a little bit treating the worker, you take the worker out. You may have to go to the ER to get a tetanus shot and get everything cleaned up. And it's just senseless. No one should throw a board with a nail on it down. They should put it in the proper place and make sure that it's safe and ready to go. Same way with sheetrock and anything else. If you got someone tearing out, you need enough people coming right up to them, behind them, to get that stuff evacuated out of the building and to make the walkways clean and safe to walk around in. Good housekeeping is what we've been talking about. Are there any floor openings? Do they have a panel off where they're working under a floor into the subfloor? And if they do you have that cordoned off or blocked off to where people don't just walk off in it? Same thing with wall openings, guardrails, stairways. You just want to make sure you have all those protected where people don't unexpectedly walk into them and get hurt. Portable ladders, probably one of the bigger OSHA violations that you see on what type of ladder you got. Number one, are you using the right type of ladder? Ladders are typed on the weight of the person on the ladder and by how high they go, and their reach. So you have different types of ladders. Type ones for shorter, smaller ladders. Type twos, like a commercial ladder, is going to be a little heavier duty, and then type 3 is going to be like a homeowner step ladder to just do some light duty stuff. So it really depends on which type of ladder you have and which one that you need to fulfill the job that you need to get done. If something's too tall for a ladder, then you simply are going to need scaffolding on it, and that's what your health and safety officer would be able to do, is to follow the OSHA rules and regulations and see which one works the safest for the event that you're in. Fixed ladders are ladders that be like attached to a building to where people climb up and down. You see the picture over here, they've got the half cage around that one to where if you slip and fall, you can't fall all the way backwards, that you're likely to fall up against that semicircle that's around the ladder and give you a chance to collect yourself and get back up on the ladder properly. Um, so those are different types of fixed ladders. Scaffolding, again, make sure you wear your lanyards and supports as shown on the picture to the right. Uh, these are temporary structures that are put up, and you need to have someone trained in putting the ladder or the scaffold up, uh, that knows how to build a scaffold. You can't just put general labor building a scaffold. They don't know how to put it together and what the pieces are and the inherent dangers that go with that. So be careful when you're using scaffolding or rolling towers, I think they call it here. Uh, don't let people stay up on the rolling scaffold while you're moving it. Don't let people on top pull themselves around from beams on top or anything. and make sure to have a safety person on the ground that's observing what's going on the scaffold and able to keep people that don't need to be under the scaffold or around it away. Uh, Lift trucks to put people in, there's a whole separate uh, set of rows for that. You must be wearing fall arrest equipment to put that on, and you got to know what the manufacturer's limit of the equipment is. So be really careful when you're going through that. Emergency preparedness and response. Uh, you've got different classes when it comes to fires, A, B, C, and D. They're all flammable, but Class A, you'll pretty much burn anything, wood and paper and stuff like that. Class C is more of an electrical fire. Class B is chemicals. And Class D is involving commercial and hazardous materials. So if you see those signals A, B, C, D, just remember A's the better of the choices. B, C, and D, going up the ladder when it comes to fire. Make sure you've got proper fire extinguishers. Make sure your stations are marked. Make sure your people go over it in your safety meetings each morning, which you really didn't cover. But when you're on a commercial project or a project with more than a few people on it, you should have a safety meeting each morning. It comes up and says our safety topic of the day is ladders. You're going to be standing on a step ladder. You need somebody supporting your step ladder. Don't be getting on the top rung, and just a little bit of safety information for them. The next day, it may be on fire extinguisher use. Have someone show them how to do that and how to get their fire extinguisher properly prepared to go um, to where they know how to use it. I think the stats say more than 85% of people in America do not know how to use a fire extinguisher. So it's a really high percentage of people who do not know how to properly use one. Flammable and combustible liquids. Some of them you can make extremely worse when you put water on. So water is not your friend when it comes to all fires. Sometimes you have to use a chemical to put a fire out, depending on what's burning. Grease on the stove is one of the simpler ones. You don't want to pour water on a grease fire because it makes it flame up more and creates a violent reaction when the water hits the hot grease. So, you want to smother those out or use an appropriate fire extinguisher. But again, you got to know how to use the fire extinguisher. You'll just simply spread the fire. So there's several different ways to control those types of fires. Portable fire extinguishers and training. Again, you're not talking about a 17-hour training course. Just have your safety meeting that morning before the job starts. Have some fire extinguisher training in there. Show people how to use it and get them trained up should they use it. The main thing is knowing where it's at. Sometimes you think, well, I know there's one here and there's one there, but you tend to forget that when you have a fire and you get excited. So make sure everybody knows where the extinguishers are at. Some of the natural hazards would be tornado. If you're working in a building, have a tornado drill or a real tornado, not necessarily a drill, then you need to be able to have a plan for that. Snowstorms, ice storms, earthquakes, extreme heat and cold, rainfall, floods, lightning. Just have a plan together for any weather related hazard that may come to you on your job site, whether you're working inside or out. You still need a plan to handle all that. Your man-made hazards such as explosions, chemical releases, civil unrest, utility outages, gas leaks, medical emergencies, structural collapse, fire. So you've got to have a plan to deal with all these when you're working multiple people on the job. It don't have to be a 45-page written plan. Just people need to know where the exits are and need to know what to do should they have one of these hazards. pop up and they've got to evacuate the building. So just a little bit of training on that goes a long, long way. You'd be surprised at times all of us have walked out of a hotel room and not known which way the stairway is. Should be one of the first things you do when you check into your room is locate the stairways and know which way to turn when you come out of your room should you need the stairway to get out. Once the smoke and the fire gets in the hallway, it's a little hard to find then. Communication start with a placard that says flammable liquid with a level of 3. That number 3 means a lot to the fire department. They're highly trained on what types of fires are category 1 or level 1, level 2, level 3, etc. And it tells them an 8 above it would be a corrosive material. The 3 is going to be a highly flammable material, such as maybe gasoline. Now, you may have some other materials that are flammable, but not as flammable, such as diesel fuel. Diesel fuel is not the flash point on diesel fuel is somewhere around 240 degrees. The gas point, flash point on gasoline's somewhere like 0 degrees, but way on down there. So gas will ignite a lot more readily than diesel fuel will. Chemical labeling, got to identify your product and your wording and make sure your chemicals are labeled properly, sort of like we talked about a while ago. Manufacturer information would also be referred to uh, by having a bill of lading on there. You might also have to have some other documents that you need when you're dealing with chemicals, uh, manufacturer's labels, and such as that to identify what type of chemicals you got. Lots of different OSHA regulations. Again, you go through in the class. So when you go through those, look at all your subparts, your parts, your subparts, this part, that chapter, this chapter. It can be pretty complicated, but when you narrow it down to your industry and what you're doing, it's really not that difficult. Um, you got employees working extra hours. The rules have changed a little bit than they are if they're working regular shifts. I know on some of the projects we work long hours to try to get a business back open. So just know how the rules change when that happens. Silica dust, silica gel, we've talked about that a little bit already. Comes in a lot of it in concrete, some of it in sheetrock, some of it in other types substances that you can have. But there's a lot of silica involved, and the requirements for silica. We had a slideshow on that a few months back about silica, and that's a whole different program by itself. We actually think a few years from now that will be the new asbestos. It'll be silica, and the people's been exposed to silica, and the employers they have, such as us, that do not protect their people from that or let them know that it's dangerous. Asbestos, we pretty much all already know the the problems that we have with asbestos and the fact they cause lung cancer and asbestosis, which is basically a scratching of the interior of the lungs because asbestos is a sort of an abrasive material. It's very small, so it gets airborne fairly easily, and it causes a lot of lung damage. And again, we're pretty much all familiar with asbestos and what it can do to you. Lead, not as prevalent as it once was, but you used to have a lot of lead and lead based paint. Unless you're grinding or sawing or cutting or eating it, it's not a huge hazard, but you have to follow the lead based hazard precautionary. So if you're doing a water damage or a fire damage on a home that it's got paint on it, and you probably need to get your indoor air quality guy to test and see if that contains lead or not. So, again, not as prevalent as it used to be, but still causing problems with kids that live in apartments and government housing and older homes, whether good, bad, or indifferent. But a lot of those have lead in the paint, and when kids get around it and eat it, it has a sweet taste to it. So when kids get around and eat it, it causes uh, really bad health effects, if not death. Health risk associated with lead exposure. Uh, you can read them there. You're going to need PPE, respirators, PPE clothing, good housekeeping, help to vacuum everything up and keep everything, uh, to where it's clean and HEPA vacuumed. You have to dispose of the lead shavings or chips at a hazardous material place. Follow your local and regional rules to get that done. And you have to label the bags a certain way for lead and asbestos. So make sure you're just following all the rules. Asbestos and lead both require a separate license from there you're working into. So don't just run out and say, "Hey, I listened to Scott's slideshow and I'm gonna go do lead and asbestos." This is a slideshow to highlight you to the hazards and exposures you have, and then I would advise you to go out and get the training. So at the drawing team, we're here days, nights, weekends, and holidays to help you. If you need any information from me or additional resources or help, feel free to call me at any time, and we will be glad to come running or come flying to get over there and try to help you out. So, again, I'm Scott Tarpley. You see my phone number there. Give me a call anytime that you need additional resources. Thank you, and I've enjoyed speaking to you.